Hello everyone and welcome to Ohio Nicole Creates. This week I'd like to share a process video with you for the birthday card that I made my niece. For this birthday card I am using the no line watercolor method, which is one of my favorite methods for creating cards, and the Coaster Critters stamp set from Fawn. One of the things that I enjoy about this stamp set is that it has an interactive option, and you can actually add in a feature that will allow the coaster car to roll back and forth on the roller coaster itself. To complete the illustration, I stamped in Simon Says Stamps Barely Beige, and this is because the color will disappear as you watercolor over it. So I am right now covering over those images or retracing those images with a micron pen. And I decided to do the outline with the micron pen because I wanted to give the images a hand-drawn feel, and I also wanted to paint with big bold colors like you would see in classic storybook illustrations. I am a big fan of children's picture books, and I love them as a child, and now I love them as an adult reading them to my old children. So those big bold prints and illustrations have really inspired this card that I'm creating today. To watercolor the images in this card, I am using two palettes from Prima Confections, and I love these palettes for having really great, unique colors right out of the right out of the box. So they're great for small projects where you don't want to do a lot of color mixing. And I'm using the Woodlands and the Tropical palettes because they have some really great, bold, primary adjacent colors to use. So the particular red that I use for the roller coaster is called Sour Wood, and I really love that, and the yellow is Pineapple. So they've got some really fun names, which is neat for painting as well. As I continue to move on with the painting, I am just continuing with the method of tracing and coloring the images in. You can see under the piece that I'm working on now that there's actually a second roller coaster. And when I first started the project, I had originally wanted to do the no line method with no lines at all, just the paint. And I found out after completing the roller coaster that it just didn't look the way that I wanted it to look. So I went back and I started again, and I used the Pigma micron pen in order to add in those hand-drawn lines, and I really like the way it changed the project and it gave it a different look. So I just wanted to point out that if you're engaging in the creative process, or when I'm engaging in the creative process, sometimes it's all about trial and error, and if you spend some time doing something and it doesn't turn out exactly right, don't get disheartened. Just tweak it a little bit and try again, and try to find a format that works for you. Because sometimes our original ideas don't always work out, but the ideas that we come up with to evolve our project are in substitution of that that plan B, plan C, sometimes plan D can be even better than what our original plan was. And you could see here I'm doing this again. I colored the fox, and I really wasn't happy with his coloring. I think I reversed the stripe on the fox. So what I did was I just stamped him and colored him again and again until I found a result that I was happy with. And it's okay. A lot of times I think that people assume creators just kind of do things right the first time, and that is absolutely not the case. So don't be afraid to play, don't be afraid to make mistakes, and don't be afraid to just learn as you are creating. And if my process can teach you anything, it's that. Be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, and allow yourself to have those backup plans and that evolution of your original idea, because it's sometimes about the journey and not so much the end project. So as I am finishing up this fox, I just kind of like to give everything a quick look over, and then I did die cut these images. I didn't show the die cutting just because it's not the most engaging or interesting part of the process. But I did use the die cut to get those nice shapes around the watercolored images. Here I am prepping the background. Again, I am using a Strathmore watercolor card. I use the Canson paper for the images themselves, but I really like the Strathmore cards for the base because they're very thick and they hold a lot of water, so you can do a lot of different techniques with them, and it's just a really nice quality paper for this kind of project. To complete the image, I wanted to give a nice watercolor background with the suggestion of a sky and with a field. So I am giving a watercolor wash to add in some texture, and then going ahead and working on the hills, and again just using the classic blue and green colors that are so prevalent in children's books. I'm not doing a lot of fancy techniques here because I want the colors of the watercolor to speak for themselves. You'll notice that I am using a heat gun, and I like to use the heat gun for two purposes. The first is just to make sure the area is dry before you move on, and the second is a lot of times when we first start watercoloring, it can be quite surprising how different watercolor will look when it is wet and applied versus when it has dried. Sometimes the colors mute themselves a little bit. Sometimes we get blooms or bleeds or textures that we didn't expect, and sometimes textures we did expect can fade out. So I just like to give the once over with the heat gun so I can see what the dried result looks like, and I can go back in and add any additional textures or washes or darken up any colors before moving on to the next step. So once I am happy with the watercolor, I go ahead and play a little bit with composition, putting the characters on and kind of starting to think about what I want the characters to be holding in their hands, and just making sure everything will fit on the card and nothing additional is needed. I did toy with the idea of putting a few more animals on there, but I didn't want to clutter since we will have the interactive element. And then finally, I thought that the white on the inside of the roller coaster was a little off. So I went in and I watercolored back in the horizon and the hill behind it, just to give it a more unified appearance with the background. And I was actually really pleased with the way that these colors turned out and how it worked overall with the composition of the image. So here I am placing the various parts of the roller coaster, and the Lawn Fawn die set does come with the die that creates the channel, which is really neat because it allows you to be very specific with the shape of the channel for the interactive piece. After cutting the channel, I do add on foam tape just to lift up that surface so that there will be room for the interactive element to slide back and forth. And I like to glue the cutout from creating the channel back into the channel itself to give the card a more unified appearance overall. You don't notice that the channel is there as much once you put that piece back in. Finally, after I have everything assembled, I start to glue the pieces back together, just checking for composition, making sure everything is exactly where I want it as I put the card together. And I find that this is one of the most fun steps because everything just really starts to come together and to create a unified scene. As I continue to glue these on here, I have also prepared the slider feature, which is gluing layers of cardstock squares onto a dime to create a bit of a lifted platform. And I believe I glued 10 or 12 layers of cardstock, and just depending on how thick your foam tape is, you'll want to be sure that your slider is tall enough to poke through the channel and to give the critter that you will glue on top a little bit of dimension. So I'm including that slider here, and we'll be gluing the car on. And then once it is dry, you can move that back and forth and watch him ride the roller coaster. As a final piece, I always like to include something handwritten. There are some really great stamps that come with this set, but I just love a handwritten sentiment on cards. I have several of the cards that my grandmother and my aunt gave to me when I was a child, and I love to look back at their messages and their handwriting. And the personality in their handwriting. So I always like to include that when I make a card for somebody else, just that very personal touch. I mounted the sentiment itself on 2 pieces of paper just to add a little bit more dimension and to help fill up the sky. Once everything is dry, I do test the coaster critter out to see that he moves back and forth pretty easily, and the card is complete and ready for my niece. Thank you everyone for watching my process video this week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you so much. Bye.